Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Age of Quarantine. We took a little break for the past few days for obvious reasons. But you know what? We decided to roll with tonight's episode because we're going to be talking to somebody that started, I believe, was to be the first hardcore, American hardcore fanzine, XXX Fanzine. And if you like hardcore, this is a book that came out recently. Um, the creator of XXX Fanzine is, of course, Mike Gitter, who, depending on how you know him, you might know him as a A&R rep who has been at Atlantic Records and Roadrunner and Century Media, so many labels. He signed Hate Breed, Killswitch Engage, Megadeth, Misfits, Civ, Sam I Am, Jawbox, Orange 9mm, the list goes on. But before that, he had this fanzine that was around from 1983 to 1988, the golden age of hardcore. And he got to interview Black Flag, the Misfits, Dead Kennedys, Circle Jerks, SSD, Control, SSD, Negative Approach, Minor Threat. Unbelievable, man. And we're going to talk to him tonight. We figure this is a great episode to roll with because, to be honest with you, the hardcore movement here in America was a reaction to the American government during the Reagan era, not unlike what's happening right now in politics here. So I can't wait to talk to my friend Mike. And if you have any questions, feel free to join in. We're going to use this next hour as a little bit of a probably much needed distraction to focus on something that we all love talking about, punk and hardcore music. So thanks for spending your time with us. Mike Gitter on the screen in just 1 second here. All right. How's it going, everybody? Thanks for joining us. This is another episode of Age of Quarantine. Very stoked about this. Mike Gitter, what's up, brother? How you doing?
Good. How you been?
I've been good, man. I took a little break from the show this week for obvious reason, but in general, been trying to stay positive and creative and all that good stuff. I see all of your followers are joining us now, so I just want to start by saying welcome. This is a episode of Age of Quarantine on the legendary St. Vitus channel, and we're using this next hour to talk about this amazing book, XXX Fanzine, which is Mike Gitter's fanzine from 1983 to 1988. And you already know that because you're following Mike on Instagram. So anyway, Mike, we're going to get into it because I have so many questions. But how are you doing? How have you been managing to get through this?
It's been good, man. It's like, when March rolled around and it looked like we weren't going to be going anywhere for a while, it really got to be as simple as, okay, if I have to lock down, I'm locking down with a lot of records, a lot of books, a lot of work to do. So I'm able to stay active in my man cave. And, certain things have been hard and certain things have been trying, obviously not being able to go out and, see shows, see friends,
Right.
go out and interact. But it hasn't been, honestly, has it been rough? Seeing people not working has been rough. Seeing people getting sick has been rough. But so by comparison, like, I have it easy.
Yeah, man. I mean, I know you're working and doing a lot of great stuff, which we're fortunate that we get to do those things that we do and surround ourselves with things that we love. But I feel you, man. It's been tough looking at what's happening to a lot of people around us, and this is the best that I could come up with in terms of just interacting with people that I look up to, and also engaging people that follow St. Vitus and music lovers like you and I that like aggressive music. So you're obviously in, I know this, but to our followers watching, you're in Los Angeles, obviously, where the music world has always been thriving. But you are originally from Boston, am I correct?
Yeah, I'm originally from a town called Marblehead, Massachusetts,
Okay.
which is about 20 minutes north of Boston. basically it's one town up from Salem, Massachusetts. And, I was born, I was born on the North Shore of Boston. Went to school there, went to college there, got involved in the music scene there, and, stayed there from being born in 1966 and leaving in 1989.
Yeah, and that's not too long after you wrapped up the book, which was in 1988. So let me ask you, I'm going to get right into it just because
Sure.
I have so many questions for you, and I get bummed out with the limited time, and with you, I know I have so much to talk about, as we've seen in our friendship, which
as we do.
Yes, as we do when there's nobody watching. But just let's get into it. Hardcore and punk rock is what we're here to talk about because that is the focus of your origin, your fanzine, and now your book. How did you discover hardcore and punk rock? And if you can, tie that into growing up in Boston and what attracted to you in the first place.
Well, I mean, okay. It's sort of that outlier theory where, you can have all the talents and all the skills, but you sort of have to be born sometimes in the right time, in the right place. And I was very lucky to be born in the right time and right place. Growing up in the Boston area, and I'll try to keep this short. We were lucky to have a lot of colleges and a lot of college radio and a lot of record stores and a lot of place to go, to go and encounter this music. So, as I was, obviously, you discover music at a young age, and when I first heard, went over to the kid next door's house and heard, Zeppelin 4 and, love it, Alice Cooper Killers and the Who's Tommy, Aerosmith Rocks. That was a world expanding experience anyway. All of a sudden, on hearing those records, the world gets bigger.
Yeah.
And all that stuff started to touch a nerve. And I think, as you were sort of playing, as you tuned into certain stations on the dial and started sort of tuning to the left hand of the dial, all of a sudden you started hearing these new sounds. And a lot of it, this is probably about 1979, where you were, and for a while where you were hearing REO Speedwagon, or Dix, that turned into Jim Carroll's People Who Died. That turned into The Clash, Rock the Casbah,
Uh-huh.
And I was actually lucky enough to have heard London Calling before that, but there was because of great college radio in Boston, I started encountering this stuff. Add to that, being sort of young and nerdy and sort of a comic book head from a wee young age, you would go to places like Newbury Comics. So while you were picking up, the latest issue of Savage Sword of Conan, or the early issues of Heavy Metal magazine, which also had music coverage in it as well.
Right.
Where I started to discover things like, Devo.
Okay.
Gary, Nash the Slash, The Residents, Gary Newman. You don't know the tradition of it. You don't know where it's coming from. But all of a sudden, it's like music that's striking you in probably in the same way that Zeppelin record was, but it became a little bit more personal.
Okay.
Then hearing, say, the first Dead Kennedys, Fresh Fruit for Rotting Vegetables, and knowing that that record may piss off your parents a little bit, may be a little bit like socially unacceptable.
Well, let me ask you though, just real quick, how do you get to Dead Kennedys from there? Where does Dead Kennedys come from?
So, college radio.
I got it. Okay, so you hear it on the radio.
Right, college radio, or being at, say, Newbury Comics on Newbury Street, and seeing these records suddenly start to populate the shelves, and you're going like, what's this? What's this like very stark, very sort of like in your, graphically in your face, black and white, um, you know, visual presence.
Yeah, absolutely. The aesthetic is
Yeah.
so important to that,
Totally.
to it. Yeah.
Totally. And also, just discuss like finding early fanzines, finding the early like Flip Sides, Maximum Rock and Roll, um, Glenn Friedman's My Roll Zine. All of a sudden you started seeing images that completely like, pushed aside every notion you had about what, a band was supposed to be like live. Because, by that time I had seen a few shows. I had seen the Joe Perry Project play my high school, play
Which is Boston again,
right.
Boston music,
or seeing like the I had seen the Ramones play at Salem State, but then seeing pictures of like HR doing backflips, like Rollins, veins bulging, bands like Wasted Youth, that picture of the singer, with, I guess, blood on it. Or actually, no, it was a picture of somebody with a Wasted Youth logo on the back of their shirt, stage diving.
Before you get there, though, I was going to ask you, because you mentioned that you saw the Ramones, which is obviously like we're talking about the early 80s. I think that we were getting a good picture of, like, because Newberry is still around. That's legendary. It's amazing.
Yeah, Newberry's still around.
That was there.
Yeah.
But was hardcore and punk rock was a reaction to like what was going on with the government. It was very much when Reagan was new to office, and there was a reactionary thing. Was there something about that and I'm not just trying to politicize it because of what's going on today. I would have asked the question anyway, but was there something about that you related to, that you had some kind of anger that made you want to gravitate towards the bands that you were mentioning, like Wasted Youth and Black Flag and Bad Brains? I'm assuming that you had to have had some kind of anger towards something, or rebellion.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it was quite that articulated, but I think all young people, naturally feel disenfranchised, naturally feel, sort of, they only, only they know their woes, and young males tend to also be pissed.
Yeah.
You take all those feelings and you're just like, I don't like what's being served up to me. I don't like, what we quote unquote the mainstream is offering.
Right, like Foreigner and Styx that you'd mentioned a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, at that point, I was like I was a nerdy Jewish kid from like the suburbs of from the suburbs of Boston, and growing up in kind of like a Yankee town. I didn't drink, that wasn't impressive to me. I was more, I read, I wanted to be more literate, more creative. But there was still this just, kind of like open nerve almost that needed to be sort of
Burst
touched.
open. Yeah.
And I think, when I first started, when I first heard, loud rock, and then start discovering something that actually touched that nerve pretty directly, it was almost like this immediate connection.
And when you go to your first shows,
yeah,
are you going out on your own? Do you have friends that you made that you're going with? Are your parents taking you? That's kind of stuff I'm interested in knowing about as well. Before we get into the fanzine and all that. Well,
I mean, it early on, me being kind of inquisitive and finding out that there was a college radio station, not too far from where I lived, called WMWM. It's it's a Salem State College radio station, which was probably within, I was lucky enough to live in a reception range of it.
Yeah.
And, I started sort of calling in and, talking to the DJs and became friends with a couple of them. And, would with my, my friends from junior high school, show up at the radio station and start, leafing through their records.
Yeah.
And start going like, oh, the inquisitive mind going, what is this? Like, Black Flag, what's this yellow Black Flag Jealous Again record?
Right, with like 4 bars on it. What does that mean?
Right.
All that stuff. It's
Right.
yeah, that's interesting. And so when you start going to shows on your own, what was the first show? What was the first hardcore or punk rock show? That's a loaded question, but like tell me what that was and when.
I would probably say it might have been the Ramones at Salem State College, probably 1982.
Wow. Okay.
And it was the Ramones, and obviously they were a fixture on the landscape anyway.
And the really the not to get technical, but I guess you could say they started punk, even though perhaps Richard Hell might have come slightly before, but still from the same family. So really, that's the origin of punk rock right there.
Yeah, it's from the same family, but it's also the Ramones were just badass.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like they were, they had the songs. Obviously they had songs, image. It was the whole package.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I'm not going to get into it too much with my experiences because this is about you. But I wear that like a badge of honor that I actually got to see the Ramones before half the band passed. Obviously, probably 10 years after you had gotten the chance to, but still such a thing that's like very much directly leading to what we're about to get into, which is the hardcore movement. So you saw them in 82 and your fanzine starts in 83. So that's a pretty quick transition. Talk to me about that transition where you go see the Ramones, then you become a hardcore kid, and like really quickly you start a fanzine. Again, I'm going to just make this a loaded question, but you mentioned a few things that were out before XXX started, like Flipside and Maximum Rock and Roll.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also wondering if XXX was technically the first dedicated American hardcore fanzine, because that's what I thought. But I'll let you answer all those questions.
Oh hell no. XXX was really like. XXX, like myself, I would say was a respectable, probably second generation, American hardcore fanzine. I think that there were already great. Zines had been around, from the 70s. From things like Bump, or Backdoor Man, or I would, even magazines, like when I would go with my mom, to Stop and Shop, I would wander off to the magazine rack, and there's Cream. Okay, who's like the Human League, Stray Cats, The Clash, Gary Newman. Let me start checking this. Blondie, let me start checking this stuff out. And then I discovered a magazine called Trouser Press, which even more specifically covered, sort of left of mainstream music. And that's really where I started finding out about like the Kennedys, like Black Flag, like DOA. So by the time I got into it, that trail was already was well blazed. And it was no longer a trail. It was actually starting to become a highway.
Okay.
So there were plenty of fanzines, or self-published publication. A fanzine is a fan-generated magazine.
Yes, DIY.
Right. So there were plenty of like great zines, around at that point, and there were a lot of things that inspired me. Hold on, we'll play show and tell.
Oh yes, I love that because I know you have such great things around you, man. And while you're doing that, let's not forget. I do want to know what the first hardcore show was as well, because that's a pivotal moment for you in and where it takes you.
It was either like some combination of Minor Threat, Misfits.
Wow.
Like something like that quite early on. Yeah, I mean it definitely blends together, because again, I was lucky enough to grow up in Boston, where we had one of the early great American scenes. Thanks to Al Burrell from SSD Control.
Yeah. Shout out to Nancy too. She's got a great book out that we're gonna
buy her book. Yep, buy Nancy's book. I mean, the trail was already blazed, and the shows were already happening. At places like the Gallery East and the Media Workshop, which I was a little bit late for. But they already started migrating to halls, to bigger venues like the Channel, all that. So, and also bands were starting to make Boston a regular stop. Black Flag had been through there many times. Minor Threat had already come there. Negative Approach, the Meatmen. It was golden age, man. It was a regular stop. It was a regular rock stop anyway from the very beginning. So, and it had a number of great clubs. So
go ahead. Sorry.
So that's right. But I mean, for instance, coming across fanzines like Forced Exposure.
Oh, okay. So there we go. That's is that an original?
Yeah, it's original.
Oh.
That's the second issue.
Wow.
This one with a picture of John Stab from GI at the Emerson.
From government issue.
Yep, at the Emerson dorms. That was the first one.
Wow.
Or things like locally, there's a guy named Al Quint who had a zine called Suburban Punk.
Oh wow.
Now,
I heard about that one.
Right. Yeah. Al Quint was a guy in my neighborhood. And if you look at this, it's literally like mimeo. It's not even Xeroxed. It's mimeographed.
Now, what is that, Mike? Mimeographed.
It was like the way of sort of mass printing, using a drum, using sort of ink and a drum of ink, and you sort of
got it. It's almost like silk screening.
Yeah. I wouldn't call it silk screening. It was sort of just the way this stuff got printed. I think Al may have Xeroxed this cover with this picture of Discharge, which I think was taken from somewhere. See, Discharge, hot new single.
Yeah. Amazing.
So looking at things like this and realizing the dude who did it, lives one town over from me. And I think we bumped into each other and started talking at a show. And I'm like, he may be a couple of years older than me, but the experience and what was in our reach was pretty similar. And the great thing about discovering the scene also was it put it all in your hands. And I think that was to me that was the great promise of punk. That was the great promise. That was a great promise of DIY culture is you could do it yourself. You could reshape the world as you wanted to see it. And, at the time I was, a kid who liked to write, a kid who liked to read. I wasn't particularly adventurous enough to start a band or foolhardy enough, either way. And I was like, but yeah, I could sort of, this is my route to sort of get up, get out, get involved and do something. to me, the promise of punk was to put the world in your hands.
Absolutely.
And really to allow yourself to like reshape the world that you wanted to see and you want to live in.
And those pictures, as they were very, those pictures and interviews, but especially like the artwork and pictures that you talked about before you started your own fanzine that were powerful to you, which many of us can relate to as somebody that also would go to the local grocery store and then kind of veer off into the aisle of magazines waiting for my folks. And in that same way, that is, you're now putting that out there in a non-social media world for other people that are not seeing Dead Kennedys or these bands that we're talking about, Minor Threat, they're not on TV.
Actually, hold on 1 second. So I'll show you the image that sort of tied it together for me.
Please. Yeah.
So here to me was like, this was the call to arms. And this was sort of, this was the call to arms, which was discovering this record.
Oh yeah, SSD Control. That's finally on, it's not on Spotify yet actually, but I did get my hands on a digital copy, but yeah, fucking unbelievable.
Right. And if you look at, I mean, to me, if you're a 15-year-old kid and you see this image of guys who are local, some of whom who've even come skateboarding in your hometown.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, I grew up in I grew up in Marblehead, which is 2 towns over from Lynn, which is where Al and SSD are from.
Yeah.
And those guys, there were guys like Tony Perez from Last Rites, Andy Strahan from DYS, Jake Phelps, who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, but was sort of he was a notorious Boston crew guy. He's the guy in it's kind of the town, we always count him as like the town terror and town legend.
Yeah.
But yeah, he also became the editor of Thrasher.
Oh wow, that's funny. I got my Thrasher hat right here.
See?
Used to read that all the time back in the day in the 80s. Yeah.
We'll get into Thrasher in a few minutes. But yeah, you basically had all these people who were, if not directly in your world, or at least in the background, and it just put it all within your reach.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me take us somewhere, because I do want to make sure that, because I have so much more to cover here, and we're gonna get into the real fun stuff of like shows and bands and eras. But can you just try to walk me through briefly, like, how, without the internet or email, how are you getting your content? Are you doing it all yourself? Are you getting writers? Where are the writers coming from? What about the photos? And are you bringing a tape recorder with you to see Black Flag? Are you doing phoners? How is it circulated? Walk me through that process a little bit.
Sure. It's all of the above. It's however you stumbled into it. In terms of like where information was coming from, you had to go to the record store. You had to go to Newbury Comics. You had to go to Rocket Records and Saugus. You had to go to shows and get flyers. There was almost a sort of like, you had to know the secret handshakes almost. And it was literally like once you got in it, you became immersed in it. And you would find out about shows, you would look at other zines, you would see addresses, there's the address for Discord Records. Well, I want to write about their records in my zine. Let me write to Ian and figure out how to do that. Or let me write to this person at Discord Records, and the person who wrote me back was Ian Mackay.
Wow.
And he sent me, God, the first Minor Threat, I think the third pressing of it.
Oh man.
Which I still have. The SOA 7-inch, the Faith Void. I'm like, thank you. I get to do this and get free records too. Cool.
Yep. Not realizing how valuable they're going to be one day.
Yeah. I mean, that too.
Yeah.
And I still have about half of them.
That's amazing.
So yeah,
I should hope so.
Yeah, I mean, I regret the ones that sort of got sold off when, and you get a couple of bucks. But
So wait,
oh
so
well.
you write. This is a great thing you're walking me through because it could kind of serve as an
Yeah.
example for how you would get access to stuff. So Ian Mackay writes you because you wrote him
Mhm.
via snail mail because we're
Right.
talking about the early '80s. And then how do you get the interview to take place? Is it on the phone and you have a tape recorder? Or is it at a show in person and you got your recorder with you?
Well, I mean, again, you would write. There's obviously the snail mail communication.
Okay.
Occasionally you would pick up the phone and talk to somebody, but for the most part, it's like, oh, cool, Minor Threat's playing. I have my trusty tape recorder with me. I will get it into the venue, much like Rerun got his tape recorder into the venue to tape Doobie Brothers in that episode of what, what's happening, I believe. Um, and I literally found Ian and Jeff in the cornered them by the bathroom at the channel and interviewed them, and they were kind. I mean, look, I've been very lucky with a lot of the people. A lot of the people I was like basically cornering at that point. And luckily I was able to learn it, I was able to sort of like learn it with local bands,
Right,
which,
right. Because you could go interview SSD locally, and so I guess you're almost like kind of building a reputation, just like an underground band would. Oh, that's Mike Gitter. He's started a fanzine. We just did an interview with them, and then
mm,
is that fair or not, or is it a little
no,
different?
no, because you're still a kid getting off the sidelines. You were still a kid sort of like, I was still like a nerdy kid with a tape recorder, and there was an earlier version of XXX called Suburban Mucus, which is an incredible name. And,
Yeah.
and literally what that, and there's, I did 3 issues of that with another guy who lived in my town. And, um, you know, that sort of, that got, so I had done some interviews. I learned how to do that, and how do you learn? You read interviews in other magazines, you read interviews in other fanzines, and you just sort of wing it, which is what we were doing, Um, and so, basically I would show up to shows with a tape recorder and just, corner my subjects.
Yeah,
And
right. Because it's not planned. It's not like they
yeah,
do it now. You're just going up to them. It's like cold calling. You're like, hey,
yeah,
hey Henry, or hey HR, can I talk to you for a second? And you must have had I don't want to get too gossipy, but you get the video of Henry Rollins doing an interview with some kid that's a
mhm.
pretty viral footage, where he's just not into it. You must have had either a good reputation at a certain point or a better approach that you were able to talk to the greats from Bad Brains to Black Flags, the holy trinity of the movement.
Yeah, but you're only, you're only sort of blessed or canonized like that, um, you know, in hindsight. Um, but like I learned interview etiquette pretty quick.
Just want to give
Um,
a quick shout out to the official Ozfest who's watching right now. What's up?
hey, what's going on?
Go ahead.
So, you learn interview etiquette pretty quick. Like I can think of one instance, actually the first time I interviewed Black Flag, and you know, Greg, Bill, and Henry were more than willing to do an interview. It was great. Um, but when I said to Henry, "Hey, how come you changed your name from Henry Garfield to Henry Rollins?" He kind of looked at me and he goes, "I should skin you alive."
Wow.
And it was like, it's funny because I still have that tape. And at that moment, I kind of learned like, oh, there's certain places you don't go with people, and
Right.
there's certain certain questions. Sometimes they're dumb questions, or somebody's gonna come back. You're gonna touch the wrong nerve, which is fine. And you just eventually I just learned the questions to ask and things that I was interested in talking about. you know, and found some very sort of, you know, willing, you know, found people are generally willing to talk about, you know,
Those are
their
the risks
in
that you
their
have.
art.
We're already for almost 40 minutes in, so I'm going to try to move
Oh, Jesus.
through.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't believe it. I told you it goes by quickly. But before we step off this process, because I want to spend the last 20 minutes really diving into the scene more. It goes too quick. But how are you? This is just a dorky question. How are you replicating the fanzine? How many of them are you making when each issue?
You know, from you know the first issue I think was like 75 or 100 copies,
Okay.
and you know by at its peak I was probably doing about 3,000.
Okay, and you do
so,
your typewriter, but you're using a typewriter and kind of cut and pasting.
Yeah, it was shrunken. It was basically shrunken typewriter font. You know, rubber cement, letraset. You know, basically the way fanzines had been. Basically the way I had learned that you know you're supposed to make a fanzine. Eventually, I figured out things like how to halftone. You know, if you get your photos halftoned, you know, you suddenly have like a much better pictorial. You know, suddenly your pictures are a lot cooler. You know, if you have printed offset, you know, on slightly better paper, you know, people are going to be more apt to like hand you $1 at a show for a copy of your zine, or somebody's, you know, going to be more willing to pick it up, say, at, you know, Zed's Records or in Long Beach, or See here in New York.
So you had it available at stores across America through the networks, mailing them out, people ordering from you, and you're mailing them to their house, just like how Discord did it, or SST, same concept.
Well, at that point, there was also a network of really strong independent distributors, you know, places like Rough Trade, you know, Systematic, Toxic Shock. You know, in a lot of times it was just like finding a contact there, reaching out to that person, and then being willing to take your zine, you know, your zine, like, you know, many records on consignment.
I love that.
Yeah, and there were also things like, you know, getting in touch with people with say, you know, Caton from Hyrax, or Pat Dubar who worked at Zed's, or Big Frank who worked at Zed's, and you know, sending them, you know, 20 copies, and then them sending you back like, I don't know, like, you know, $15 after they sold them.
They're like, oh, it's selling. People are buying it. We need more.
Right.
Okay, let's talk about the subject of the golden age of hardcore. You know, we'll go through it in a fashion where we go through like 83. They say is when that was the golden age, and you know, Bad Brains, Misfits. Tell me, like, you know, what to you was were the greatest of the great during that time? I mean, we can all assume things, but for you, really being in it, talk about the greatest gems from that time.
Well, I think 1983 was a year that a lot of like great, you know, great bands peaked, and a lot of you know, the legends sort of put out their classic records. Minor Threat, Out of Step. You know, Misfits, Earth AD.
Yeah.
SSD Control, Get It Away. You know, I think you hit this point where, you know, bands sort of evolved into their brilliance, and sort of hit that sweet spot where they knew how to write their songs, they knew how to write their you know, knew how to play their instruments.
That's a peak for all of them, yeah.
Right. Yeah, but it hadn't turned into, well, now I can, you know, play guitar solos and
oh, we'll go there. We'll get there. But yeah.
You're not off the reservation by that point.
And for you, I mean, I know you just said SSD was a huge one for you, which makes sense, because not only were they a great band and extremely heralded by all you know, all to this day, all generations of the hardcore movement, but Bad Brains, obviously, you know, you were probably lucky enough to see back then, and the Misfits. Yeah. I have to ask too, like, seeing a band like Misfits, in comparison to like Minor Threat, everyone's in street clothes. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what that was like briefly before we kind of move on to some other bands of that era.
The difference was
the costumes and all that.
Right. Minor Threat and to a certain extent, also SSD Control, they still were us. They were still of this, they were still mere mortals like us, although they were pretty amazing. The Misfits were punk rock Kiss,
Yeah.
and they were, you looked at those guys and think of like being, still a teenager, and you have these like two towering, muscular presences, plus, Danzig, who was, certainly like a very, a super aggressive frontman, and these amazing songs, and their worldview was also horror movies. Like it, what were they really singing about when on Night of the Living Dead, sounded like zombies and flesh-eating ghouls.
Right.
And I love that because, again, comic book kid, horror movie kid.
Right.
And also the Misfits, the Misfits in particular, just those are great songs. And I think that's a reason why, that band, those records, those songs are still as vital now as they ever were.
I'm sure it had to have been interesting to see the Misfits at the Forum, having been at shows in your local like VFW hall and stuff like that.
The thing that was great about seeing the Misfits, or the original Misfits come back, was everybody, and I think this was a great thing. People finally got to see the Misfits, and it wasn't the records. It was something bigger and burlier and uglier and noisier and more immediate, but yet the songs rang through and everybody got to sing along.
Yeah.
And it was noisy. It was often. I mean, if you listen to any of the Misfits recordings from back when, it sounds like a freight train with a guy melodically yelling over it.
Right.
And we got like a slightly we got the arena version of that, but we got that. And
right.
I think that those I saw them like two or three times, and all those shows were great.
It really were. Yeah, I was lucky enough to catch two of them. One was with Agnostic Front, which relates to the book because you have Agnostic Front in here. Did you? I'm going to jump around a little bit, but back then there were geographically big scenes in LA with obviously Black Flag, and then you have like MDC in Texas, Discord in DC, Boston, as we've talked about, New York, Agnostic Front, Cro-Mags, all that stuff. Were you? Did you feel like there was like any competition, or was there pretty good unity amongst the scenes back then?
I mean, early, obviously there was a little bit of friction between the Boston kids and the New York kids.
Yeah.
And I think, and that's pretty like well discussed and well documented. I think that, what I'll say about them was every town had their own scene, and every scene, had their own bands, and they weren't trying, if you had, say, Detroit's in Milwaukee, they weren't trying to ape a New York sound. They were just trying to be themselves.
Everyone was very regional to their sound. Yeah.
Right. You had region. You had sounds of the town. You had sounds of the town, and that I think was something that was sort of has been lost to time, which is kind of a shame. Because
I feel that way too, because it was like that even through the '90s, which with bands that you signed. Civ is a New York sound, and Orange 9mm is a New York sound, and etc. So it is a little bit lost and sad, I think, unless we're out of touch and I don't realize that maybe there is a thing. But
Well,
I felt like it was,
no, I think like, in LA you had like, the Fullerton sound.
yeah,
And that, if you look at like Fullerton is a small, is a relatively small town in, or city or town or whatever in Orange County. But yet you have like the Adolescents and Social Distortion,
oh
uh,
yeah,
and you and so you had this like sound that came out of that area, and maybe it was based on like one or two people's like approach to songwriting or playing guitar, and other
or
people
just like
riff off that.
a suburb versus an urban community, you know what I mean? That kind of stuff. And I apologize, Mike, if I'm kind of breezing through. I just want to make sure I cover stuff. And by the way, this whole thing is going to be on YouTube. By the way, I know we have a couple people watching. We're competing with the election, but this will be on YouTube and on the St. Vitus channel for everyone to rewatch from the beginning. So this is great stuff. So the golden era. Talk to me briefly about the telltale signs of that sort of ending, because then we have, which you're still covering, by the way, because you're going into the 85 era and 86, what is now crossover, and you've got some thrash and metal bands. Now you're covering Suicidal, COC, Metallica, Anthrax, but
Right.
at the same time, SSD is turning into a rock band, and so is Uniform Choice is becoming a rock band. Let's talk about that a little bit.
I mean, I think and we're talking about like, even though we're talking about a relatively compact amount of time, a year or two this way or that way, was a huge amount of time in terms of like all those bands' musical developments, and bands sprang up in the wake of other bands. I think around 83, 84, a lot of these sort of classic bands had peaked, and Minor Threat had done their trip. They left a very pretty corpse. Let me see. The Misfits, I think they had sort of, Glenn had sort of strained against, the musical limitations of what was happening in that band and wanted to move forward, which turned into Sam Hain.
Yeah.
In Boston, the guys from SSD, from DYS, they weren't as much rock. They were guys who grew up on Aerosmith and Alice Cooper, and discovered Motorhead. And and there were certain bands, I think, along the way that gave agency to these, to a lot of these guys to sort of musically evolve. I mean, when I was handed, this record.
Oh, Venom! Hell yeah, that's a legendary one.
Right, in 1983, I was like, this is punk times 10.
Yeah.
Like, it's nasty, it's fucked up, it's fast, it's it may have not had the sort of ideological punch a lot of the bands I was listening to at the time had, but like it rocked. And I think what you had who grew up on Sabbath and Deep Purple and all that, and they were able to fuse what they learned through bands like the Germs or Void, and who were another interesting and sort of like linchpin evolutionary band.
Yes.
And they evolved. They evolved into something. They took their own approach to it, and things got a little heavier. Now, some of these bands, some of these bands sort of hit. It's like with anything, some people just hit the right formula. In the case of Corrosion, they nailed the blueprint on Eye for an Eye, and
Technocracy.
Even into Animosity, like Eye for an Eye, which is like I said, it's like the Germs meets Sabbath meets Void. it gets a little more technical, then gets a little bit more technical, then, one guy maybe comes in or out.
Oh, by the way, just really
yeah.
quick, John Stainer says hi. He's watching.
John Stainer!
Yeah, John Stainer, the great John Stainer. What up, John? Go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
Awesome. A pretty important musician in his own right, by the way. But so you've got you have bands like that that sort of like hit new formula. I think that, like, say you had a band like SSD Control or SSD, who really who wanted to be a rock, who wanted to evolve into a rock band, who didn't want to necessarily stick to what they were doing to begin with, but for the same reason that they started playing, they started playing the music they started playing to begin with, they wanted to continue doing the music that they wanted to do. Some people nailed it, some people didn't. Suicidal is a great example of a band that's like
Suicidal nailed it. Corrosion Conformity nailed it.
Yeah,
there's a bunch that definitely nailed it. And
yeah.
Let's also okay, so when and why? Well, I know when the fanzine stopped. It stopped in '88, but how many issues did you do total, and why did you stop? Because you were starting to get into the Metallicas and Anthraxes. You were doing some serious stuff. I'm guessing it was maybe a time to shift professionally for you. What was going on there?
I mean, the way I sort of approached, there was no different approach into how I interviewed those bands, or who I talked to. I mean, it was literally like seeing, having my tape recorder on me, maybe talking to somebody at like a record label, somewhere around 85, 86, because obviously the business, as bands and audiences grew, obviously the business grew as well. So maybe I would talk to somebody at talk to Maria at Megaforce, and I was like, and she'd be like, "Oh yeah, just go and I'll tell them you're coming," and sometimes that message got conveyed, and sometimes it didn't. But I would have like tape recorder on me, and hey Cliff, hey James, it was the bar at the channel,
Yeah.
And again, that was when they were like an amazing band, but they weren't, unapproachable. And also I think one thing about, growing up in Boston was I had access to these people.
Right. Everybody was still approachable in general because of the nature. We're talking about underground. It's all underground culture and music, and you're in it at that point. What era of Metallica was that when you interviewed him for the fanzine?
When I interviewed them for the fanzine, it was right as Ride the Lightning was coming out.
Wow, you got him at that real early time. Now,
but the interesting thing was the show that I caught them at, they actually didn't end up being able to play because Lars was still stuck in immigration. I think it was the first show I went to. So it was they had plenty of time to just sit and talk about Sam, how like Cliff was able to talk about how much he loves Sam Hain.
Right.
They were able to talk about like the weird little stabs at of social commentary, and how they aligned with punk in early on. So it was
it's a pretty controversial thing when like a lot of the I guess the original hardcore is starting to morph into different stuff, and then now it becomes Embrace and Fugazi, and then bands are breaking up or they're trying to become rock bands. COC changes, Danzig becomes Danzig. Would you say you were pretty?
By the way,
I think I know the answer to this.
Yeah, I was going to say Danzig was just Sam Hain,
Right.
renamed, like just basically renamed, so Glenn would never have to change his name again as he changed members.
It's cool that you were very much embracing the changes, though, through the evolution of your time with XXX, and then eventually, obviously, when it comes to an end, you now become an A&R and you pay homage, whether this was the case or not, like by to the scene that you came from, because you're signing bands to labels now
Right.
that you came up with, the Jawbox, Orange Nine, Civ, and if I'm missing anybody else, please let me know. I mean, there's a huge list, but meaning like from back then, you know what I mean? Misfits.
I think there's been in a lot of my look, I've had a very lucky and blessed A&R career. You know, I've been there is a through line, be it, you know, musical or just at least how a band, you know, approach, you know, how a band sort of has a DIY orientation that in many cases, you know, reaches back to, you know, the day.
Yeah.
But
check it out,
you know,
man. Oh, go ahead.
No, but yeah, I mean, there's, I mean, be it, you know, knowing Jay Robbins from Jawbox, you know, because he was the bass player in Government Issue,
right?
Or, you know, Civ because I had put out, you know, when I knew Civ because Sammy handed me a tape. It might have even been it might have even been like a helmet show at CB's, and they were shooting their Can't Wait 1 Minute More video, and I knew Sammy and all those guys because I used to put on, you know, Youth of Today show. I did the first Youth of Today shows in Boston.
Oh, so you're a promoter also too, which is important.
Yeah.
I was just stopping you because we got 3 minutes left, and I want to cover a couple of quick things. But the list goes on of bands that you ended up working with at the labels, and that was like the major label renaissance for a lot of underground music. Obviously, with Nirvana hitting, and then the sort of rippling effect and the domino effect, you kind of came in and were able to bring. I mean, for God's sake, Civ ended up opening up for Kiss at the Garden. You know, crazy things, but we're going to bring it back because this is the zine that we're talking about, and this is your zine, XXX. And in the book, there's some great stuff here. Like, I want to mention to people the bookmark, which it gives a Bandcamp code to redeem, where you can check out folks doing older material. You know, you got Strife doing Void, you got H2O doing Dag Nasty. Just kind of and all the stuff that we just talked about. Amazing photos. Shout out to Brian Walsby who did this. Our friend Brian,
who was doing cartoons for me, you know, from like the early issues of XXX.
Yeah, man. Before we have to go, and I hate this because we wanted to talk so much longer. Maybe we'll do a part 2 at some point, but we could, because we'll have some other stuff to promote.
I think I answered like 2 questions.
I know, seriously. I told you the hour goes, man.
Yeah, really. Damn.
But top 5 hardcore bands of all time coming from you, I think we would really appreciate it. Tell us who those bands are for you.
Okay, so you're not getting 5, you're getting like 15.
Okay.
Top 5. The first and second are a tie. Black Flag and the Bad Brains.
Okay.
Also in the top 5, Discharge, SSD Control, Minor Threat, and the Adolescents. Now, in the next, we keep going. Don't stop me yet.
I know.
You know, Negative Approach, Corrosion of Conformity, 7 Seconds, the Cro-Mags, Bad Religion, you know, Scream, Youth Brigade, Jism, the Misfits, Siege, De Kreutzen, the Necros. You know, it's funny. It's like when you say like, just name 5. You know, it's hard to contain it to that, and I think like thinking about the impact that you know that music, that scene, and that subculture has had to this day. You know, luckily it can't be contained, and it's still, you know, it's still important and still embraced by a lot of people.
Well, the best thing about the book is also that there are bands that don't get talked about, like Gangrene and Jerry's Kids and all these bands that are not, you know, the Holy Trinity as you know, like the big four of thrash. You can kind of say they're not getting that recognition.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was important to cover as much stuff as I could, and there were certain bands, you know, there were even a couple of bands who I didn't interview back then, but I felt were important. Bands like, say, you know, Final Conflict, Siege, who pretty much is single-handedly responsible for starting, you know, power violence, grindcore. You know, is a linchpin band in their own right. You know, I didn't interview Bad Religion back then, but I did a whole page on, you know, Bad Religion and their evolution with the Into the Unknown record, which was an insanely polarizing record. But hey, who doesn't want to hear a bunch of 17-year-olds, you know, try to make a punk rock Kansas record? And had they not made that record, I don't think that they would have. See, my sort of contrarian conspiracy theory is, had Bad Religion never made Into the Unknown, would they have come back to have made Suffer?
Right, and that's a band that you signed as well. We need to mention that. Yeah. I hate that we're at that point, but this is such an essential book for anybody. If you're into hardcore and you like, you know, and you're getting into it through bands today, like Knocked Loose or Higher Power or Turnstile, we really are going to get the real shit from this book. It's not going online and going on Google. Read the interviews in this thing. Learn your culture and where it came from, man. That's where it came from.
Yeah, I mean, again, you know, always look forward, you know, but look backwards occasionally just to understand, yeah, like you said, where it came from.
Hey, can you tell us really quick if there are some notable hardcore bands today that you think people that, you know, I think that coming from you, it's a respected opinion on who you might think are some great ones that are, you know, contemporary today that people should pay attention to if they're not already.
I mean, a couple things that I've been listening to a lot recently is the band Change, which is members of Betrayed and Champion. And if you're a fan of like that kind of like Uniform Choice, Youth of Today, you know, that sort of like 1980, 85, 86, 87 hardcore sound, they do it better than anybody.
Okay.
The other record that I'm you know, is on constant play is the new record from Seized Up.
I've heard great things about them. I gotta check that out.
It's Clifford Dinsmore from Blast, and you know, I believe people who at least one member of Good Riddance. You know, those two records are great. For other new bands, and I believe this band might even be broken up by now. Loose Nukes, who I think are from Ohio.
Okay, never heard of them. Okay.
Just classic, you know, classic American hardcore. Definitely very Boston influenced. Oh, and of course, Skullcrack from here in Los Angeles, who, you know, I'll put it this way: they opened for Slapshot, you know, who are no slouches to a live show themselves. It was one of the last shows I saw before we all, you know, before we, you know, had to retreat from the Army of the 12 Monkeys. And basically they played before Slapshot, and I watched Choke come out and go and say, "Oh my God, you know, we got to work tonight."
Wow. What are they called? They're called Skullcrack?
Skullcrack.
Okay, I'm gonna have to check that out. That's coming. I feel like coming from high praise if Choke and you are saying that these guys are doing some cool shit. Man, this whole talk, as always, when I talk to you, makes me just want to put on you know, some seriously old school hardcore right now as I wind down my day.
as we wind down our day, and you know, probably need to let off some steam given the, you know, the events of the day.
Right. We may be even signing off only to find out some news. We'll see. But so, dude, this and everybody watching, this whole interview, I know there's only a couple of you that watched. I appreciate those of you that stuck around. But this whole thing is going to be up on the St. Vitus channel and on my YouTube channel. So it'll be out there for everybody to check out at any point in time, whenever they want. So they'll be able to learn some stuff about you and about your book and the fanzine. And I'm just happy that we got to do this because we've had the same conversation so many times. It never gets old, but I think it's great for other people to learn more about, what you've put out there for the past 30, I don't want to, 40 years, but long time.
Oh, wait a second. XXX is now, first issue was 83, 37.
37 years, yes. I know this because I was born in 1980 and I'm turning 40 in about 3 weeks. So there you go.
You look 20, you look 38.
Thank you. Oh man, Mike, thank you
Chris,
again.
Thank you.
And I love that this has everything in here immortalized. It's like the hardcore Bible, dude. It's so important.
And you can get it through both Bridge 9 Records mail order, as well as Revolver's web store, right?
Shop. Yeah, the Revolver Mag Shopify, where we will have some additional items as well, some merchandise, and Bridge 9 for sure. Shout out to Bridge 9. Shout out
to Chris Wren, who was a major part of the book and who did a lot of heavy lifting for it.
Yes. All right, Mike. I'll talk to you soon,
Chris,
brother. Love you. All right.
Love you too. Thanks for having me.
All right, anytime. Our pleasure.